So, we had read today about Monet's impression, Sunrise. What was the basic premise here? What was the author discussing in this particular, what was the topic? What were some conclusions that were drawn? So let's start with the general topic. What's the author discussing with this essay? Yeah, Jude. What's what? Come sit closer. It's too small of a class to have you sit back there. I can't hear you. I mean, move. Get up and move up. You guys, come on. I mean, really. I don't want you sitting back there. I can't. There's no point that a class of this small should have people in the third row from the back. Okay? Starting tomorrow, next time we meet, if you guys are sitting back there, I'm going to sit in the back. Okay? There's no reason to be afraid. We're here to, okay? I'm sorry I'm frustrated and it seems like I'm taking on you, but don't sit in the back of the class. There's only 10 of you. Okay? Jude, what were you trying to say? I couldn't hear you from behind Joan. Okay, what about the history of the place in the country? What in particular were they focusing on? After the war, which war are we talking about now? The Franco-Prussian War, right? So the basic topic is this idea of whether or not these pictures relate in any way to the Franco-Prussian War and the aftermath of it. And the history of that also involves the Paris Commune, right? Because when the war began, as we discussed last class, when the war began, Paris declared independence from the rest of France for a very brief time, formed the Commune, right? And were roundly stomped by the Prussians, by the Germans, right? I've got a couple of historical photos. There's the City Hall in Paris during the Franco-Prussian War on the left. There's the top of the column in Vendôme Square having been toppled during the Commune. There are some of the communards rounded up and killed and documented in photographs, right? It's a horrible moment in French history where much of, France itself was humiliated, but Paris as a city, because of their rebellion against the Prussians, was decimated, just utterly decimated. And many of the Haussmann projects were stopped during the war, but tens of thousands of people were killed. It's a lot. I mean, a lot of people died in the Franco-Prussian War. So the issue at hand is whether or not pictures that are painted in the immediate aftermath of that, right? We found out some things, that various people served in the Franco-Prussian War. I mean, just from the last reading as well. That Monet left France because of it, only to return in 1872 when the German troops were still there. France hadn't fully signed all of the post-war agreements to get the Germans to leave. They're still around, right? It's an occupied country in 1872. It's not until 1873 that the troops leave. So the question then comes, if we look at these pictures within a historical context, is there any way that they relate to that? They certainly don't seem to document the destruction. So how do they relate to it? What is the correlation? What is the connection between, in particular, Impression Sunrise and the Franco-Prussian War or the aftermath of it? Did you not do the reading? This one was not very difficult. What does Monet show us? Impression Sunrise. What do we see in that picture? Some of it's contextual and you need to know something. It's the Cai, that's the waterside, at the town where Monet grew up. Le Havre is the town. This is where the river Seine, that runs through the center of Paris, empties into the North Sea. And it's something of it's a functioning harbor, and one of the most important harbors in all of northern France. Second really only to Marseille in southern France as a major economic hub of the country. But secondly, it's also a tourist destination, as many beachfront towns are everywhere. Right? And we see a little amalgam of the two in the picture on the right, which is in Philadelphia, where we can see tourists walking along the waterfront, as well as the busy harbor itself, with the French flag flying proudly and steamboats at dock. Now, in the more famous picture on the left, which you might remember from intro class, what do we see? We see the same harbor, but what does he depict in that harbor? Clouds and smoke. Okay, so the classic thing that really, these days we call smog, which is smoke and fog, right? And it's probably clouds because it's sunrise. So it's less clouds as it is morning haze, right? Dewy, steamy, right? Foggy morning where the sun, you can actually look directly at the sun through the fog because it clouds enough of the UV that doesn't kill your eyes, right? And emerging from the fog, we see, as you mentioned, smokestacks. But they're not just everyday smokestacks. They're not industrial factory smokestacks, the steamships. Okay? And you see this pretty clearly in the one on the left, right, in this area over here. You can see those smokestacks pretty clearly. There's a little bit more behind them as well. What else do we see in the harbor at Le Havre in Preston Sunrise? Speak up. Fishermen coming in or going out. Two small rowboats, right? Not power boats, but they appear to be rowboats. So we have this signal, if you will, of sort of old ways of progressing, right? Old individual fishermen fishing for his own take. Juxtaposed against that, and back with those smokestacks, we also have a lot of masted ships, right? Large clipper ships. These are not pleasure boats, but rather these are shipping boats for the high seas, under sail rather than steam, which were still quite common in the late 19th century. What about on the right? What's over here? Cranes, indeed it is, and it's, from the reading it says quite clearly they are cranes. And that what Monet has done in this picture is altered the scene a bit. So not only are these things that we see, which are symbols of industry, symbols of economic prosperity, economic strength. In addition to these things, Monet has altered a bit of what he sees. He doesn't show us any of these houses on the right here. He doesn't show us any of the waterfront that we see in the Philadelphia picture. Instead, we see nothing but the open water. And in addition to that, the far side of the inlet on the right, he's extended so that we can actually see more of it than you could probably see from where he's standing, because these are both most certainly painted from the exact same spot. Right? So he's altered the composition a bit to focus on certain things. Now, how does all this relate to the Franco-Prussian War and its aftermath? Jude. After the war, exactly, France is getting back on its feet again, right? And what Tucker does with this reading is he goes back into some documents from the period where critics are talking about the fact that artists really should be encouraged to show this. And that landscape was a place where they could find the possibility of showing the greatness of France again, right? So Monet's work seems to fit very directly into this idea that industrial pictures, it's a different way of looking at it. You know, with Clark and with Herbert, we talked a lot about changes to France, about losing old France, and about how there might be a possible negative thing though with that, right? And that when the painters were working with things, are they in sympathy with Haussmann and the Emperor? What? But in Tucker's reading, we find out that from the 1870s, right, there's another way of looking at industrial progress, a way that is in fact very patriotic and in keeping with a sense of renewal, especially following the war, where so much of France had been decimated. And that gives us the possibility to look at these pictures afresh and think of them as symbols of patriotism, right? And not necessarily in an imperial way, you know? Not sort of siding with the emperor who doesn't want uprisings and all of that crap. This is after it anyway. This is now the Third Republic. Right? So he presents us a different way of looking at industrial progress, not as something that has wiped clean the slate of what had happened before and made people feel as if they were losing their Paris. Right? For Tucker, it's a positive thing. France is rebounding. France is on its feet again. And I think this makes it very interesting to look at Monet from the 60s to Monet in the 70s. So these pictures put 5 years apart. Some of you have been here for 5 years, Marymount, right? This could be your freshman and your senior work. But the difference between the two is not necessarily the 5 years, but the intervention of this tragedy, of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and 71. You wonder why we want you to know dates, right? These are kind of important things. So if we look at this Saint-Adresse, if you were to look at this on a map, right? So France kind of, if Belgium and Holland is up here, France kind of comes out like this, right? And Spain is over here, okay? The Mediterranean is down here. Germany is over here, okay? Paris is over there, right? Le Havre is sort of here. And the Seine River works its way, comes up there. And it sort of sits on a piece of land that goes like that. Okay? So this is where Le Havre is. Saint-Adresse is just right there. Right? It's a beach town near the big city of Le Havre. And you can see that in this picture before the war, Monet is focusing entirely on sort of the old ways. No industry here whatsoever. It's just not lovely. You know, that's the place to go hang out at the beach, right? People pushing their, it's all people that we see kind of swallowed up in a way in their society. Yeah. They're pushing their boats off to fish, small families coming together as a small community on the shoreline of a tiny town to practice the old family traditions. It's not an embrace of industry. It's not a celebration of that. It's not even an acknowledgement of it existing. Right? It's a picture of quaint rural France unchanged. Right? Picturesque. And after the war, we get more of these pictures that seem to either bring it in or focus on industry. Not only in the city, but everywhere in France. Because to this day, Le Havre is not a huge town, even though it's a major port. And even your reading talks about the fact that it was a place that people just didn't really recommend you go there. Right? There wasn't much to see in Le Havre. I've been to Le Havre, and there's not much. I went because of this painting. It's not there, it's in Paris, but I went because let's go see Le Havre. It was like we couldn't wait to get out. You know, there wasn't a whole lot there. And they say in the 19th century, the guidebooks say the same thing. Right? But it's where he grew up. So for him, there's a bit of nostalgia in all of this as well, which might be part and parcel of the beach at Saint-Adresse. since that's a suburb. Also on the Seine, another picture from the National Gallery by Monet shows these ships riding the Seine. And Rouen is about, I want to say, 20 miles upriver, right, inland from Le Havre, but still on the Seine River, where again we see this sort of celebration of mercantile economy, these great seagoing vessels having put into port in the city of Rouen. And again, in the years immediately following the war. Right? So as we look at the subjects that Monet is choosing around the years of the war, Tucker's reading gives us a way to try to understand them, to try to look at them more closely. When Monet comes back from his sojourn, he had gone to England and then to Holland during the Franco-Prussian War. When he came back, he settled outside of Paris in the suburb called Argenteuil, also right on the Seine River, and renowned for being, what would you call it? We don't have anything in a sort of a rural place that you would go. Rural is the right word. It's not a suburb, it's more like an exurb. If you imagine that word, right? It's not like Frederick versus Germantown, right? Further flung. And a place where people go, because what happened at Argenteuil is that the Seine widened out and slowed down. You know, rivers do that. When they're narrow, they're fast. When they're wide, they're slow. And there's a part where a bend in the river at Argenteuil where the Seine River widens way out, which means that the water is really nice and calm and terrific for sailing, right? Swimming and whatnot. And so it became, I don't want to say a resort because that gives it the wrong spin, but a destination, right? To go spend a weekend in the country, right? You would go to Argenteuil. This is where Monet lived, right? And he chose it because he thinks of all that water. With his interest in light, his interest in color, this place where the Seine widens out was for him a fantastic location to try to do what he was doing. And in both of these pictures, the one from the National Gallery on the left and this one's also in Philadelphia on the right, he's focusing on the highway bridge, the road bridge through the center of Argenteuil, crossing the Seine River. And you'll notice in our picture in particular, and we looked at this a little bit down at the museum the other day. Right? It was there. If you look at the bridge supports, the stone bridge supports, and all the color he brings to them, he's really interested in how the light is hitting the water and bringing that color up into the stone of the bridge in these sections here. Right? And you can see the amount of color he's bringing into this. But from the reading, we know that this bridge was also brand new. It was only built after the Franco-Prussian War, that there had been a road bridge here before, but it was bombed out in the war. In fact, it was bombed by the French to keep the Prussians from using it. This is normal. That's not uncommon, right? You don't want if you're retreating, right? You don't want the enemies to be able to follow you quickly. So, you see it chasing, the guy's knocked in goers with the guy that's running the African tank. Same idea, blow up the bridge. Then the Prussians can't use it to get across the Seine. And so it has recently been rebuilt after the war. So both these basically show almost exactly the same view, just sort of looking different directions. So you have to imagine that these trees here is this tree here, right? And we're just looking sort of that way in this picture, right? We have the exact same view of that bridge from the same side of the river, right? And in both of them, we get this sense of not only the solidity of that bridge and his interest in the light and color of how it reflects off that bridge, but more than that, is that bridge is a sign of the revival and the progress that had come to France, right? Rather quickly following the war. This is a symbol of France's future. And you'll notice in each of them the focus on the stone and the iron, that marriage of these two materials being very modern in its way. We read about his interest in the train station, the Saint-Lazare train station, as being interested in modernity, right? Here he's interested in that modern use of steel technology, but also you get a sense in both of these of the permanence of that bridge, the solidity of those bridge supports, right? This is a new France built to last. And at the same time, he gives note to the fact that this is, in fact, this sort of tourist destination, right? So you see a nice little horse and buggy moving across the bridge in the picture on the right. And in the picture on the left, we see people who are walking across the bridge who are just stopping to watch what goes on, right? Looking at what's happening in Argenteuil along the river. So people just using that new structure to get even a better view than Monet himself has over the water. Right? And even the boats that we have, these are no longer merchant ships, these are pleasure craft, right? Some of them moored and some of them in use, tied up along the shore, even one out of frame at the bottom, right? We only see the mast of one of them down at our feet, right? But this is also the kind of leisure that comes in the aftermath of war, right? It's a carefree modern world where the progress that has come and the revitalization that has come has given people the opportunity to simply enjoy themselves. And in many ways, that's a huge part of this picture, is that enjoyment. I've got a couple of nice details of this, right? The boat in the back on the left. In the quite simplest manner of painting, right? That man in the boat is just a few strokes. I do love the touches of orange in the sail. Like somehow it's not right unless you put those two flecks of orange at the base of the sail. But there's a man in a single hold boat, a single occupancy boat, tooling around. We also have a pair of lovers, I assume. We want to read into this, don't we? A pair of lovers in a little rowboat. She's got a nice little pink parasol as he's rowing her about the slightly choppy waters of the Seine. And this is exactly what the people on the bridge are looking at, just as Monet himself is looking at it, right? This is the prosperity and the peace that has come to France. In addition to the highway bridge, there was also a railroad bridge that ran across the Seine at Argenteuil as well, and Monet pays just as much attention to that. So again, here we see a steam engine lurching across the bridge, steam pouring out. Monet loves steam, right? Artificial weather, in a way. And another pleasure boat tooling along beneath the bridge, sort of looks into the late afternoon with the yellow light, you know, when the breezes are nice on the water. How similar a composition it is, really. You know, all the choices, you blur your eyes, you think of it the same thing. And in the Clark reading, we started off by talking about those pictures where we saw steam engines going off into the landscape and how those were signs of industrial invasion into the countryside. But the Tucker reading gives us another way of thinking about this, that steam engines barreling across the French countryside might actually be a good thing, and not just a sense of the land being scarred and polluted and beat up by industry. This wasn't on display when we were downtown, but it's one of my favorite pictures by Monet, period. I think he's at his best in the early 70s, really. Late 60s, early 70s. And it's, again, his adopted town outside of Paris. You know, really don't use the word suburb. The suburbs are where people commute to the city from, you know, every day, right? So people who live in Arlington, right, they commute to D.C. a lot. I don't. I commute here. But a lot of people who commute downtown, and Arlington's a suburb for that reason, right? But Argenteuil had its own economic base, right? People who lived in Argenteuil tended to live in Argenteuil. They didn't live in Paris. They didn't think of themselves as Parisians, even though it was a quick train ride to Gare Saint-Lazare, the Saint-Lazare train station, right? Monet took it when he went to visit his dealer all the time. So those images of the train sheds that we saw before, that's where he got off the train when he went into town. But the people who lived there considered themselves residents of Argenteuil, not commuters, not a bedroom community. It's different from that. And Monet seems to be reveling in the peace of this countryside, but at the same time giving us these images that marry these two things, one of which is leisure, one of which is the heavy sailing, I don't want to call it an industry, but, industry, commerce that's there for people who want to come out to put their boat in the water and sail. And those are always part of it. They're on the present part of living in Argenteuil. People wandering around and simply enjoying themselves on a relaxed Sunday afternoon, the sort of thing we don't get to do now that the school year has started, right? And at the same time, with these country manors that we have in the background, we have encroachments around the manor of smokestacks, signs of industry, that the cute old country manor that has been there for generations is sort of getting crowded around the outside with signs of progress, signs of industry. So again, some nice details of a family taking a nice little spot in the shade, relaxing, smell the grass, have a picnic, setting sun. Sailboats working their way across the Seine. I think it's sort of fascinating that it looks as if the sailboat was a bit of an afterthought, doesn't it? Because the thickness of the paint at the shore behind it was painted first. And he came back in and stuck the sailboat in right over the top of all of that, and then scundled some of the paint into the reflection down below. Again, the further into the distance he gets, the faster he seems to paint. In this case, the further sailboat with more sun on its sail is nothing more than two strokes of paint, really. Right? A green one for the boat, a yellow one with a loaded brush, yellow and white at the same time, for the sail, and that same color then dragged across the dry paint to make up the water. Gracie's shaking her head. I know, we don't have a freaking chance, do we? Right? But at the same time, doesn't it make you want to try? I know. Well, you don't, and you know how it looks so easy? He's doing about 20 of these at once, right? And in fact, one of the things the Tucker article mentioned is that he would often have 2 or 3 easels set up at the same time and be going back and forth between them as the light changed so that he could get these different effects. There's another version of this exact picture in a private collection, right? And it's slightly different. But he's doing them at the same time. So how does he do it? He doesn't ever put his pen down, or in this case his brush. He's always, he's driven. And I think it's that fiendish dedication to craft is why it looks so damn easy, right? It's the same thing, like, I was going to say somebody play guitar, like a really good guitarist, like Clapton or something play a guitar. I was mentioning something you never heard of, like Richard Thompson playing the guitar. He's just like, shit, but he just like, he's just, okay, just do this, and then the fingers just fly over the fretboard. I'm going like, and I still sound like hell after years of playing with it, because I get it like an hour a week, maybe, right, on a good week, and that's in the summer. So I don't have the calluses, I don't have the stretch, and I don't have any kind of musical capacity. And, I don't practice it. It's like anything else. If you're going to get good at it, you got to do it. You just got to do it. And you got to do it when you don't want to do it. You got to get up when you're tired and just get at it. But yeah, it looks so damn easy, doesn't it? And it's at once inspiring and daunting because it's just thrown down this gauntlet. That's impossible. Pass. And there's a nice close-up of our much more complex area of paint, right? But there's our Courtney Manor with these, again, these smokestacks on either side of it, right? And it's a wonderful sort of composition because it gives it an almost even spacing of the smokestack, the spire of the manor, and then the smokestack, right? And they rise on an almost even trajectory from low to high, right? Sort of that. And you start to realize that he's almost pairing these things. What was France great before is France great now. And you can almost look at this picture, I looked at this picture for a while before I realized those were smokestacks. Because I just kind of figured they were part of the manor, and then you realize what they are. And they're not bleating out steam at this particular point, but they're still part of that broader message. So it's important to think about what we're looking at in these impressionist pictures, because sometimes they show us things that are stunningly beautiful, and then sometimes they include things that are not particularly attractive in their own right, but have everything to do with the period in which they're painting. Right? We could take the things that we read from this article today and go back and look at some of the things that we've talked about in the past, that we've seen in the past, Manet's Railway, showing the Gare Saint-Lazare, the Saint-Lazare railway station, the Pont de l'Europe, which is directly behind this, so that this corner that's right here is this corner right here. So these people are walking behind me on this part of the bridge here, before it makes its first bend in this direction. It goes over here. So through the girders, that part of the bridge there, what you see here. Got it? Right? And then it curves around further over here from where they're sitting, which is just past here, looking back this direction. So still, both of them are celebrating industry in Paris. And we can talk about Haussmann in negative terms, right? The butchering of old neighborhoods, the displacement of the working class in order to make a Paris that was very polarized between the rich and the poor. Or we can talk about it in another way. And neither of them means that the other one is wrong. These are conflicting ideas that are in society at the time. That yes, this does represent a huge wound in old Paris. But it's also Paris that is now industrially, economically prosperous and safe in the aftermath of the Franco-Prussian War. So I'm talking about, if these pictures are painted in the 60s, we couldn't be talking about that, could we? If they were painted in the 1850s, we'd have to be sort of just thinking about Haussmann. But since they're painted in the 1870s, that brings up a different issue. Right? Historical context is everything. I don't know if we looked at these in class or not, but these two views of the Saint-Lazare train station, so you can see where we were talking. So this is where the Caillebotte picture, where they're walking there, there's that bended this way. And then Manet's girls kind of down over here, right? So same thing. There's that bended here. But each of these now showing the tracks themselves and all of the industrial waste that's rising from it. That in a modern world where we're very much interested in ecology and green issues, we can look at it and sneer, but for a Parisian in the decade following the Franco-Prussian War, Baltimore Museum of Art on the left, right? We don't look at these as images of smog, right? We look at them as images of progress. And certainly also, sorry to put them up there, but Monet's image from inside that same train station, where again the famous bridge is here, through there, in the middle, right? And we're looking out on it from inside the train station. But again, that artificial weather that's created inside the train station by the trains coming and going. This doesn't mean we're done. Those are just the slides to talk about Tucker with, right? You guys need to do the readings. You need to come prepared to talk about them. You don't want to listen to me talk for an hour and 15 twice a week, right? I really need you to have read those. If I start to get the sense that you haven't, there'll be some sort of check and balance in class, which could be anything from a pop quiz to making you do responses on all of them and only do revisions on some of them, right? If you can't be on your own to do this and come in prepared, then I'm going to have to intervene, and I don't want to do that either, okay? So with the next one, we have a response. I'm sure you'll have that one ready, but make sure you've got the stuff read. And can answer those basic questions that we use for the responses. What's the big issue here? What are they trying to prove? What's the connection, right? You should be doing that with all the readings since we don't have a textbook, right? Those are your textbook, okay? So please don't put me in the position I have to be. Right. I wanted to talk a bit about the road to Impressionism, how we got there, what was going on in French painting just prior to the Impressionists for the rest of class today. Is that thing kicking out too cold? I see everybody doing this. Okay, I will, do me a favor, okay? Could someone take the initiative to send me an email reminder? I'll write to the dude's physical plant and say, hey, it's really cold in here. They got it set at 70. So I'll bump it up by, should I say, like 73 or something, because people are dying in here, and see what they can do, okay? It's easy for me up here because I'm burning steam, right? That I don't notice it, so, and I'm also not right in there. If you sat closer, you'd be out of the direct flow. Just saying, okay? Okay, the road to Impressionism. Frederic Bazille. By the way, there's a Bazille show coming to the National Gallery in the spring. Frederic Bazille and the Birth of Impressionism. A big show I think it opens in March or April. And he was good friends with Monet, so there's a picture of Monet with Bazille posing with Monet's wife Camille in a study for a large version of a luncheon in the draft picture that Monet had planned but never finished. And then a picture by Bazille of an old medieval fortress on the Mediterranean that you can still go visit. Looks just like that. The photo I have has got a bunch of little tour buses at the base of it, right? Because we drove by. We were going to stop, and it was just crowded with people, so we didn't. But Bazille is a fairly instrumental figure in the foundation of Impressionism. In 1867, he actually began the plans to organize the younger artists who were all having trouble getting their works accepted into the annual salon, get them to organize and then put up an independent exhibition, independent from the official exhibitions, right? 1867. So Bazille puts this idea forward. Doesn't really go anywhere that year. It doesn't really come to fruition until 1873 when they finally did get together, by which time poor Frederic Bazille is dead. He died in the Franco-Prussian War. Right? He was in the army of killed. Yeah. The main reason, like I said, is because they are rebelling against their regular rejection by the establishment. The French Royal Academy every year ran an annual show of the members of the Academy called the Salon, right? Spelled just like a nail salon, right? And it wasn't just a single room. It was massive. Hundreds of thousands of people visited. In fact, the year the Impressionist show opened, I think 450,000 people went to the Salon, whereas 3,500 went to the Impressionist show. Right, that same year. So I mean, it was a big, big thing. But it was also very much traditional. And it was run by the leaders of the French Royal Academy, which was still a training ground for artists. And they didn't particularly cotton to the idea of innovation. especially innovation that made it look as if the traditional artistic training wasn't valid anymore. And that's certainly what the Impressionists are already getting to before they're even called the Impressionists. That idea of making a work of art that resembles a sculpture in a way, where all the brushworks are polished, where it has a sense of extraordinary realism, almost photographic realism. So they didn't like the Impressionists, and people became known as the Impressionists for specifically that reason. And Basile in 1867 decides to rebel. Now, there's a couple of things that have inspired him to do so. One is that from 1863 on, they become much more, the Salon had become much more hard-nosed when it comes to these avant-garde works. The most famous example is at the Salon of 1863, where Manet's Luncheon on the Grass. Monet is going to make his own version a few years later, right? Without the nudity. But Manet's Luncheon on the Grass was rejected from the Salon of 1863 with about half of the works that were put in. Now, just so you have a sense of scale, the annual Salon, usually around 5,000 works of art are submitted. And yes, some are going to be juried out. But in 1863, half of them, a full half of them, were rejected. And there was a public outcry, and they mounted across town a second exhibition of all of the rejected works. The Salon of the Refused. Right? The Salon des Refusés. And Manet is in that. So he's part of this, right? He's really a friend with all of the Impressionists. And his rejection, as well as theirs. Monet has just as much trouble getting pictures in the Salon. Sisley, all of Basile, all the rest. That is one of the major reasons why Basile decides in 1867 to try to organize these guys. And say, hey, we need an independent venue for showing our works of art. And the other thing that inspired him in 1867 to come up with this idea was the fact that, as we read in two other readings, Manet had an independent exhibition that year. Remember at the Universal Exhibition, he had his own tent with all of his works in it. So these things are cooking, right? You could get away with it, right? Manet got away with it. So Basile tried to get the group together in 1867. Doesn't really go anywhere, right? And it's not until 1873 that it finally does, and they ask Manet, join us. You're one of us. And he says, no, I want to make it in the Salon. You know, I want to stay with the official group. And part of that has to do with the fact that Manet had a sort of higher class status than many of the other painters did. He wanted to stay traditional. Right? Okay, so we've got this issue about the Salon. This problem with the Salon. And I had a slide just to sort of illustrate what the Salon was sort of like. Right, so here's viewing the Salon in 1847. Oh my God, can you believe that? And work it back 2 or 3 high in the rooms. You know, the really good stuff would get better sightlines than the sort of second-rate stuff. But this gives you a sense of the throngs you would see, you know, in these things. I guess, you know, I go to a museum in New York these days, right? I just don't like going anymore in New York. It's so crowded. We're so lucky here, aren't we? You know? But the reactions you're seeing are to works of art that are, you know, still red on the walls, right? And they're sometimes new and shocking and challenging. And I love the guy in the right border there. And the one in the middle, and they can't believe him. The guy, there's a critic with his hat on taking notes. Fellow over here thinking, somebody trying to pontificate. There's me as a kid. And talking in the museum and so forth. And look at this woman here, but no, can you believe it? The craziness that's happening around us, right? They're reacting to these silly modern paintings they're seeing. And everybody went, you know, everybody was an art lover. I guess, you know, now they're just internet trolls. Right? They just go around and they troll Facebook and stuff. I guess people don't do Facebook anymore, but you know, everybody had a voice in this. This was a place. We don't have TV, we don't have radio, we don't have movies, you know. This is a big thing every year, right? So the Salon was run by the Royal Academy. The Royal Academy goes all the way back to the 17th century. It was actually founded in 1648. And the reason the Royal Academy was originally founded was because it was going to be a training ground for artists. That was the whole point. And it was the Royal Academy because these artists were going to be trained so that Louis XIV, the Sun King, right, the king could come and choose the best artists graduating from the Royal Academy to come and work for him. So it was training in a very regal style, right? Training artists who are hoping that they'll get selected to live at the court at Versailles and work for the French king. That tradition, despite all the revolutions we talked about, right? We talked about 3 revolutions between that and the Impressionism. The Royal Academy is still there. It's still called the Royal Academy, even though there's no king anymore, right? The Royal Academy exists. The salons exist. The salon was the place where the graduates showed their work, and from the beginning was where they would be picked to come and serve the king, which is it might sound horrible, but God, you get to live at court, you get the annual retainer, you get all your works paid for, you get your meals from pretty good cooks, right, et cetera, et cetera. It was a really plush job, right? It was a choice place to be. So that is what they're reacting against, is this very traditional, right, very aristocratic establishment that is holding on to that tradition very firmly into the 1860s, right? And when they opened their first show, the Impressionists, finally in 1874, in the spring of 1874, they open it and reschedule it to be 1 month exactly, to the day, 1 month before the opening of the annual salon, with the idea that they would try to steal the thunder. Now, there's no way in this little 3 or 4 room gallery of a photography studio that looks out over the Boulevard de Capucine. We know now what we're looking at here, right? That's the Grand Hotel on the left. This is that very swanky part of the Grand Boulevard that Herbert talked about. That's right near the Opera in Paris, right? And one of the most desirable addresses in all of town at that point. Despite all of that, there's no way they're going to attract the same amount of crowds we see at the salon. But they're making a gesture, right? To open a month before the salon. And close pretty much just as the salon opens. So there's not even an overlap. That's a 1 month show. Yeah? So, this is kind of our background, right? The salon sticks around. It's still there till 1890 or so, but on the decline after the Impressionists. A lot of people attribute to the Impressionists the decline in the official salon. But it morphs, and there are official salons, not the salon, but official venues that continue all the way into the 20th century. So, Impressionism begins as an idea in the 1860s, finally to be realized 6, 7 years later, right? Now, it's easy enough to think about the Impressionists with this rather extraordinarily modern way of painting, subjects that don't have a narrative, scenes of everyday life that don't really have anything special about them. The artist's life is the subject matter, in a way. What the artist sees at any given moment is fair game for painting. And then painted in a way that is, in fact, antithetical to what the Academy was teaching. It's easy to think that this sort of only came with the Impressionists. In the picture on your right, which is in Kansas City, can you believe that? Of all places to get, this is one of the most important early Impressionist pictures, right? It's the view out the window of the gallery where they had the first Impressionist show. So you could walk by and look out the window and see the same scene next to Monet's picture of that scene. Right? It wound up in Kansas City, of all places, right? But look at how he treats the reflection on the roofs of those cabs. And they become this sort of rhythm, almost look like notes on a musical score, right? This bit through here, and then the bits that are down here. And he's got the same color on all of the, on his brush for all of those. And it's almost like he come back in. I haven't seen this picture person, but top, and when we get back in here, you see it has no structure whatsoever. There's nothing there. It's not on top of the cab anymore. You see that? Even from back there? Right? Up here, that's what it is, right? These are all dead on top of the cab. So you want to get that rhythm of the standing cab behind the road tree, which stays on top of the road tree. And some of them don't align with any kind of taxi cab. There's just some darkness there. But no attempt at structuring that black, right, the ebony black cab. And this is utterly flying in the face of the way that the Academy taught, right? Now, this did not come out of nowhere, right? This didn't just burst forth with Monet and Manet, Sisley and Basile, right? There are trends that led us here, and I wanted to talk about one of them. I guess it's going to be very quickly, 10 minutes. I've got 10 pictures to show you in 10 minutes. I'm not going to get through them. There was a group of artists, going back to the 1830s, who began to paint landscapes by doing a number of studies in the old royal forest of Fontainebleau. This is 1833, is right after the Second Revolution. Right? Remember our revolutionary history, 1789, 1830, 1848. In 1830 is after the Restoration has been stopped, right? The second group of regions has been stopped. It's well after Napoleon. And it's right when they have a parliamentary style regency under Louis Philippe. And that means that the old royal forests outside of the royal palace of Fontainebleau, which was the royal hunting palace in the countryside, you can still go there. Right? The forests that were set aside as the preserve for the French king became open to the public. And artists began to flock there with the idea of doing studies of nature. Now, none of them are working outside, not a single one of them. They would make the studies from nature and then come back into the studio and paint what they had seen from the sketches in the studio. But they still try to capture very much a communing with the life of the forest, the sense of understanding how those trees grow. Don't you kind of get the sense of this, that each of those tree studies was maybe not quite so gigantic as that to begin with, and he just made them a whole lot larger? Look at this fallen white tree. Just how monstrously big it is, but you get the sense that the sketch for it was something more human scales, right? And within this, we situate Huntsman showing, in fact, that these forests are open. And part of the joy in these very large pictures is to stick your nose into them and poke around and see what there is to see. So they're departing for the hunt in the forest of Fontainebleau. We see a couple huntsmen on a mule. We see another man leading a burro out of the shadows to join them. They're probably waiting for him, wondering why he's late, right, before they get set off on their hunt. And the longer you look, the more you see on the right-hand side, another hunter stands right on the edge on a burro. You can see him just over here, right? Another donkey belonging to one of the huntsmen is there, and then there's one of their hunting dogs. You know, me and dogs, right? Likes me a good picture with dogs in it. But capturing that vibrancy in the countryside, and then, of course, the two in the middle that are stopping to drink the water, you know, well before it's too polluted to do so. Right? So enjoying the countryside and capturing that sense of this vibrancy. These sorts of landscapes that celebrate nature and have studied it very, very closely, even focusing on a particular kind of fall of light, are important precedent for the Impressionists. The idea of studying nature directly, right, and bringing those studies into your pictures. Of course, the important step that they haven't taken yet is the step toward actually painting outside. Although they would do some cloud studies out there, but nothing is in the way of a finished picture. We have quite a few of these Fontainebleau school painters in the National Gallery, and these monster pictures. This one's probably 8 feet across or so, 6 to 8 feet across the base. right? Again, the forest of Fontainebleau, and Corot has gone out and studied with great interest and with great scrutiny the topography, the different kinds of foliage, and then make some small attempt to give it a little bit of narrative. The woman reading the book, for example, in the foreground. Some nice details here. If you look closely enough, and again, that's what they invite from you, the viewer, you start to see a couple of deer bounding around on the hill, right? You see them there now. A stag pursuing a doe, mating ritual. Another sort of horse in the background, or something back there on the hill, right? But at the same time, I think that because the overall effect was different, the critics didn't have so much trouble with this, even though, as you can tell, the brushstroke is really quite broken up, isn't it? And unpolished. They're not painting rocks so much as they're painting paint. And then some semblance of subject matter here, although the anatomy, now that I'm seeing it from here, is really wacky, isn't it? Look at the size of her feet. Right? Speaking of Michael Phelps. Reading a book and allowing us to see way too much of her shoulders and breasts in the process, right? There's something kind of misogynist about that, but some people suggested that maybe what Corot is doing is giving it a narrative of sorts. That maybe she's Mary Magdalene in the wilderness, which would account for the erotic overtones of her costume. They're unable to fully turn her back on her previous prostitutional ways. Just think about these big views. Maybe it's just the perspective of sitting over here. It's from here, so it's like all of a sudden she's the one that you can see the top of. Yeah, looks kind of crazy. Other artists were part of this Fontainebleau group. You might remember Millet from the famous pictures of the women sowing seeds or picking up, gleaning the last scraps from the fields. But he's had quite a bit of time in Fontainebleau as well, doing images of sort of the landscape there. And again, with some sense maybe of narrative, although it's impossible to say for sure. Right? There's very, very small panels, you can probably tell. Right? So this is all part of this school of Fontainebleau. That is a major realist landscape movement, a naturalist landscape movement. That is an important precedent for what the Impressionists were trying to do. And of this group, the most important was probably Theodore Rousseau, who actually moved to that region. Most of them would just go down there for the weekend and make sketches and come back to Paris and paint. But Rousseau decided that he needed to live there. He needed to understand the changes of the seasons by actually living near the forest of Fontainebleau. And so he took residence in the nearby town, which is called Barbizon, B-A-R-B-I-Z-O-N. And the whole group, this whole Fontainebleau group, became known as the Barbizon School. There's no school, right? But the Barbizon group, named after this town where Rousseau settled. And as you look at these, you see that what Rousseau is really trying to capture, developing out of this Fontainebleau school, is a sense of a particular moment. A sense of a particular fall of light, a sense of this particular swamp immediately following what appears to be a really horrible thunderstorm, where the sun has just quickly broken through for a second and illuminated part of the landscape, most of which is painted in the most scumbly kind of manner. Detail back in the left. There appear to be some figures, although it's hard to make them out for sure, in the landscape. A very good sense for the varied nature of the underbrush, of the undergrowth. Also a terrific sense for the way the light plays off of the puddles left by the passing rainstorm. All of these things are in a way proto-impressionist. Right? This is a really important movement for what eventually became Impressionism. On the opposite side, again, more details. Are those figures bending over there? Look more like cows, don't they? So then what are the sticks going up from them? Right, can you see those? Yeah. I need to go back down to the next one and stick my nose in it again. But I think at a certain level, it's all just become paint. You know what I mean? and not much more. None of these pictures, he said really that none of these pictures were intended to be quickly thought through. That all of them were incredibly deliberate, and he spent a lot of time in the studio trying to capture that momentary effect. A hoarfrost is an early crystallization of the ground, right? An early frost. And so we catch that hoarfrost in the foreground. There's even a little figure there by a gate. And then that amazing sky, right? It's hard to believe that he didn't paint this outside, right? Because he's so able to capture. And we get these here, right? Especially this time of year in the winter or in the early part of the fall when it's still humid as heck. And you can start to see the sun, the clouds turn yellow, and you know it's going to be really terrific in a few minutes, right? And he's capturing some of that sense of what it really looks like, how the sky can turn to fire at particular points. Right? And there's our one little figure moving through the frosty landscape past this little wicker gate down there. And again, capturing the way the frost gathers and that first frost, right, on the tops of the things that we see throughout. I quite like Rousseau. He doesn't get enough press, These are really terrific evocations of a particular moment. At the same time, they're very, very dramatic, aren't they? He doesn't tend to like calm skies. He likes storms because he's much closer to the Romantic movement. He likes skies that look as if God is there and pissed at us, Thor throwing thunderbolts down. You can easily imagine that happening in the hoarfrost. Here we have figures moving through the landscape. Again, after the rain, that same sense of capturing the puddles that have gathered along the path. I've got a couple of the details of this. There's our figure on horseback with another figure on foot moving through the trees. And the idea that the storm has just passed is picked up by the shadows that are cast across the landscape, right? In the foreground, everything's still in shadow, some sun there just beyond our figures. And undaunted by the rain, we have other figures working the field still in the background. So this is a huge part of the run-up to Impressionism, are these naturalistic landscapes. Many of them painted in the forest of Fontainebleau by a group known as the Barbizon School. Right? And Monet admitted as much, that these were very influential on his early work and his interest in landscape. Right? I had more to show you, but we're out of time. So Thursday we'll talk Manet, who's also obviously an important precursor for the Impressionists. We'll look in particular at the work of art that's discussed in your reading, the Masked Ball of the Opera, but then we'll look at the other Manets that we have available to us locally and talk a bit more broadly about his career. And I'll give up trying to wrestle with the technology sooner and just plug in if I have to. So we'll see you on Thursday.